The following video will be a pseudo-academic analysis of ballistic gel compared to the medium it is emulating. Pig tissue, live pigs, recently butchered pigs, meat that you can freeze and thaw, as pertains to humans. The reasoning being, at one time the military figured out that a pig was almost the same as the wounds they would see in humans. And this has been demonstrated to be valid repeatedly. They just found that spending a year preparing the target was a dumb thing, so they switched to something called ballistic gel. Now, for the sake of argument, human tissue and all other animal tissue, especially pig tissue, is about the same. So it's based on using pig gelatin, porcine gelatin. Thickness averages and ranges of thicknesses for human anatomical layering. Okay, here we go. Skin thickness over the human body is almost always around 2 millimeters. This is the average over the majority of the surface area. Lots of qualifications and ifs, ands, or buts, and asterisks and exclamation points. There's very low variability, but where it exists, you can detect it. But we're not counting the muscle and fat that's usually attached. We're talking about the skin itself. On the chest, in a 12-inch by 18-inch surface area covering here, and front to back anywhere from 8 inches to, whatever. Soft material only. 6 millimeter of muscle with a range of 6 to 8 millimeters. 7.2 millimeters of fat on average. Very little variation, oddly enough, even overweight people most of the time. 5 millimeter of bone based on 4 to 9 millimeters at the sternum and half a millimeter to 2 millimeters thickness in the rib cage. This is ignoring cartilage, but it also takes it into account. But it's not used for the depth or thickness of hard bone, even though some ribs are basically cartilage. This is the hard bone material. Abdomen, 26 millimeter total soft material compared to 14 on the chest and back. This is a 14-inch by 16-inch area. 16 millimeters of fat, ranging from 12 to 100 millimeter. High variability for fat. For muscle, some variability, 6 to 16 millimeters, averaging out at 10 millimeter. And the bone is ignored because we're talking about the abdomen instead of the chest. The only bone you're going to be hitting is the spinal column if hit with a projectile. Warning, this is not just about ballistics. It's also including things like injury during a car wreck, skiing accident, impalement on a picket fence, whatever. This is all based on information from trauma wards and trauma caused in shootings, in cases that were being investigated, wars, all the way to police activity, or being a cop being shot. So this is where the data comes from. Human head, we're doing front to back here is 12 inches by 8 inches, and around 8 to 12 inches tall, depending on the person. We're again going to be invoking bone, but not exactly. 2 millimeter soft tissue total, based on 1 millimeter for muscle and fat. There's half a millimeter for your forehead, 5 millimeter for the lips, and 14 millimeters for the cheek. But the majority of the surface area, if you average it out, all things being equal, this versus the muscles and the gels, we do that. The bone is around 6 millimeters thick, but it varies from 3.4 to 8.3. That's about the same range of dynamics there for the chest with the sternum, by the way. So we can now put this as kind of a wash. Let's continue. The human thigh. At this point, we're ignoring the bone in the middle. The majority of damage that you could do that would be incapacitating, which is what we're mostly talking about, or lethal, would involve blood vessels or nerve bundles. Spinal column versus the leg or arm. So here we go with the thigh. 7 by 8 inch cross section. We're not doing the surface area on the front. 2 millimeters total soft. Excuse me, not 2 millimeter. 55 or 50 millimeters soft tissue. 45 millimeters of muscle. 23 to 65 millimeter dynamic range. And we got 2.5 to 15 millimeter thickness for fat. That averages out to 7.2 according to the records and files I could find. And again, we're ignoring the bone because blood vessels and nerve bundles are the main things that would incapacitate a person through a leg. On the arm, it's the brachial artery and the nerve bundles. And again, we're ignoring that in favor of the tissue damage. Arm, 40 millimeter total soft tissue, and it's a 4 inch by 4 inch cross section for an arm, my skinny arms. 35 millimeter muscle, 7.2 millimeter fat, and we're ignoring the bone again. And the reason I'm bringing up the thigh and arm is simply this. If you think that shooting someone in the leg when they're attacking you with an axe or a gun is going to stop them from continuing, if you hit one arm or one leg, you do not understand the problem. But they can just know they can't. Number one, hitting a 1 foot by 1.5 foot target is easier than hitting something that's about 2 inches across, or this thing that's a bit bigger. Okay, are you going to hit all the nerve bundles? Where are the nerve bundles in the arm? Don't look it up. Think, where is it? Now I turn my arm this way. Now I'm hitting 2 different bones. That's why they aim for the center of body mass. It's to stop the attacker, incapacitate them, not necessarily trying to kill a person. It would be ideal to shoot them in the hand, but you'd have to shoot the other hand because people can shoot left-handed. Same thing with throwing an axe or having a knife, and they're still running at you. If you hit them in the leg and the hand, okay, well, they have one more hand and they can hop on a leg. And there are videos of people doing that. Let's get that out of the way. For generalized thicknesses that you need to pass through to cause incapacitation, taking all of these together and using the major surface areas, we indicate at minimum your average lean person is 3 inches, maximum of 8 inches for a larger person. Whether it be fat or muscle, it's equivalent. In the case of the low end, it's all based on 2 millimeter thickness for skin, and almost all of it's based on the same bone. Those are the only two variables that don't have much variability to them. 12 millimeter fat, or about 1/2 inch, and 20 millimeter for muscle, almost 1 inch, for 3 inch depth. For the 8 inches, we get 100 millimeters of fat and 45 millimeter muscle dynamic range. Full range there works out that you must have at minimum 8 inches of depth. Now, the density of the material, skin, muscle, and fat, all of them have the following numbers in this order: 1.1, 1.05, and 0.91 grams per milliliter. That's based on the density of water. They're all in a narrow range that works out to 1.02, depending on who you talk to. Bone density works out to 1.08, up to, that's mostly gristle, aka cartilage, up to 2.1. Now what that means is, if you do all the averages for that, you get 1.45, up to 2. So flesh density is half what that is of bone, or bone density can be like 45% higher than flesh. It's about water density. Now, we're going to talk about simulants that were used. Again, I mentioned that the military and etc. would use recently deceased pigs or post-slaughter meat, and that worked out to meat density, fresh meat at body temperature, which is almost identical to, again, meat. Muscle density is 1.05. The average here is 1.02. It's a good simulant. Just simulate muscle. That'll do most of this work. For bone, use wood. Okay, so now that we're at that point, your meat target, Paul Harrell reference, works out, let's say, pork. Okay, 1.09 grams per milliliter. It's almost identical. It's a wash to complain about it. That's the thickness of skin or density of skin. That's why they picked that. So let's go from there. If you freeze and thaw, I looked this up, you lose 0.3 to 3% by water of weight loss. You get 6% loss, or 1.7% loss, if you just keep it refrigerated. So it's better to freeze and then thaw the meat beforehand. Now, gel blocks, ballistic gel that are used for testing cartridges and generally weapons, works out to 1.02 grams per milliliter, or 1.05. That's for 10% and 20% gel. The density, quote-unquote, gel being doubled only adds to it emulating more fibrous material, the slowdown caused by tendons and ligaments, or the stretchiness of tissue. That's why ballistic gel is used. And again, it's usually based on pig gelatin. It's derived from pigs. Now, the FBI standard for 10% versus INS 10% equivalent standard is 12 inches for FBI, and INS wants 6 inches, almost exactly half. That's not caused by them using different densities of gel. That has nothing to do with it. Again, the gel density isn't different. It's based on other characteristics, which are hard to emulate. The NIJ uses 20% as their standard, and they only need 8 inches of depth. Again, I mentioned that if you were talking about the overweight person average, maximum requirement is 8 inches. So 8 inches or more is good enough for NIJ, National Institutes of Justice, or something like that. The INS wants 6 inches. They don't care. It's good enough. And the FBI standard is 12 inches because they need to be able to do through a person sideways at the abdomen. That was their basis. All of this is calibrated based on the same standard. A BB gun pellet, a 17.7 caliber or 4.5 millimeter steel round ball, fired at 600 feet per second. Yes, I know it says something else. Shut up. And it's supposed to penetrate within 5 millimeters of 3.5 inches or 3 inches, depending on who you talk to, or 3.25, or 90 millimeters deep. But then they say there's more variation. Not a pellet gun. And this has to be maintained for 4 days before you fire anything into it at 4 degrees Celsius, refrigerated only. That's inconvenient as hell, but then again, firing, and this is all based on firing from 10 feet, this is easier than keeping pigs psychologically and well, for every other reason. Let's talk about our projectiles. Now, there's an extrapolation I can do later about impacts in cars and that sort of thing and why G-forces are involved, but let's do this. Double-aught bug. Ballistic gel test, all of them I could find. 20-inch depth. Definitively lethal, no matter how fat the person is. Number 4 buckshot, 15-inch deep at 15 feet instead of 10 feet. 24 pellets, incapacitating and lethal instead of just lethal. It could be incapacitating. It's lethal. Birdshot, number 8, 8 inches deep. Barely one of the lethal standards, NIJ capable, at 10 feet. The standard you're supposed to test at. 4-inch pattern, possibly incapacitating or lethal, depending on how heavy the person is, and the angle, and a bunch of other variabilities. And again, this is center of body mass, which is easier to hit. Not hitting a head, not hitting specifically the chest, not hitting a leg. Just center of body mass, right at the point where the sternum ends, and you can hit the abdomen and the chest. Birdshot, 4.5 inches deep at 50 feet. 4-foot pattern. You'll hit more than what you're aiming at. That's why birdshot is not really useful at long distances. Actual birdshot tests seen on YouTube videos with data. Number 8 birdshot through a full choke to keep it compacted. Maximum damage at various ranges. At 10 yards or 30 feet, we get 6 inches depth in gel. Reaches some organs. We get 3 inches or full thickness depth of tissues, but not necessarily doing anything internally because hitting muscle, skin, and fat really doesn't incapacitate anybody at 25 yards. At 50 yards, we get 2 inches depth. We get into the skin and or fat, maybe in the muscle, but it's not very reliable. And again, not incapacitating, 2-inch depth. At 74 yards, we end up with 1/2-inch depth into the skin. We get in the skin, the fat, or the muscle, depending on where you hit. At 91 yards, we get 0.4 inches. We can only get through the skin. At 99 yards, you get eye hazard from number 8 birdshot fired out of a shotgun with full choke. Beyond that, you don't get enough where it actually sticks to the gel. Number 8 birdshot can go through 2 to 4 sheetrock panels and or pork ribs and a shoulder and no sheetrock, which means it can go through the ribs and muscle. Penetrative capability. Number 4 birdshot at arbitrary distance, 4 to 5 sheetrocks panels, or pork ribs and shoulder and 1 more sheetrock panel, which means it could overpenetrate to the other side. Number 4 buckshot, 6 pieces of sheetrock, that's 3 walls, and or an exterior wall, that's going through your building. Double-aught buckshot, basically through everything. That's the entire video about the penetrative value of firearms and cartridges, comparison between animal and human tissue, and if you're doing this for hunting deer, double the numbers you need to go for depth, and or find another ballistic medium. And yes, it is actually based on muscle. It is based on emulating pig muscle using pig gelatin because it was easier than raising a pig and shooting them to test cartridges. And these days we're going to be switching over to something else, I'm sure, because having to have it sit there for 4 days at just above freezing is impractical as hell. But again, it was less impractical than raising pigs and just shooting them, or waiting for somebody to get hurt and testing out the corpse. Thank you for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with